know the why human trafficking work is needed: to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. In every TNT group, we say this powerful prayer: please take these chains and free me from my internal prison. Take the pain and replace it with joy. Take my existence and replace it with life. Take my sorrow and replace it with happiness. Today I live by choice, not by chance. I make changes, not excuses. I am motivated, not manipulated. I am useful, not used. I choose self-esteem, not self-pity. I trust others that are trustworthy. I am not bound by others, but I have boundaries. I eliminate from my life those that offer me despair and disrespect. I work toward healing, and I put my energies into my freedom and recovery. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation, episode 121. And this week, I am solo again, continuing on talking about the survivor's journey. And before I move to the fifth journey, which I'm going to talk about next week, but this week, I just want to talk about the survivor's journey and why and how it came about. I have seen just for a couple of decades, I've been doing this for about 28 years, just on focused on human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And it's sad because I see a lot of survivors struggling, and I see a whole lot of advocates trying to help. And advocates, the ones that are trained and skilled, they know enough to connect survivors to all of the resources that they need. And they know that it's important to build a relationship. And they know that it's important to be genuine and authentic. But, they know safety is so critically important. Safety is always your number one concern when you're working with a survivor, making sure they're safe. But in a lot of respects, safety is external. Living free is internal. It's an internal process. Freedom is largely internal. And there's a lot of sort of miscommunication. We talk about chains, people being chained. That's true, but often not literal chains, not literal chains. I say all the time, trafficking is a lot of chaining people's hearts, chaining people's minds, chaining people's hopes, more so than chaining people's wrists and chaining people's ankles. It's more about manipulation and stealing your trust, stealing your loyalty. Often, a con man convinces you to give your trust to them. And so it's those types of violations that cause internal shame. And that shame has to be dealt with. That trauma has to be dealt with. But people who don't know how to do that say, well, I'll raise awareness. Because if I raise awareness, I'm doing something. And raising awareness seems comfortable. And I'll leave the trauma work to the therapist. And then the therapists say, well, I see people that have trauma, so I must be a trauma-focused therapist. Okay. And then there are a few that are certified in a particular modality and they offer therapeutic treatment.
But then if you even get that far, where a survivor is going to a trauma treatment therapist that's trained, that's once a week. But you're living with your trauma every single day. So, if we think of freedom, just like chains, freedom is less like someone kicking in the door and rescuing you, even though that needs to happen if that's a case that needs to happen. But freedom isn't necessarily snatching you back. Freedom is a lot of internal work in healing from trauma. So I hope that makes sense, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about chains and what that means, and about freedom and what that means, and about healing and what that means. Because we think if we link our survivors to a bunch of services, to healthcare, to lawyers, to housing, to food, to shelter, that somehow we are healing them internally, somehow by osmosis, by magic, that they are being healed. And so I'm here to tell you that that is why I developed the survivor's journey, because it doesn't happen by magic and osmosis, but it has to be intentional. And I don't think that you necessarily need to be a trauma treatment therapist, although we need them. We certainly need them, but you can do trauma-focused work without having to do a bunch of education and schooling and degrees. You can do more than trauma-informed care. And, I talked about trauma-informed care. That's just something we should all do so that we don't trigger someone's trauma, so that we don't re-traumatize them. But that's really not going to address or heal anyone's trauma. So the survivor's journey is trauma focused, directly on helping to address trauma and heal trauma. So that's why it came about, because I see a bunch of people that are so passionate and committed, but they don't actually have the skills to do what they need to do. And then I see a whole host of survivors that want to be healed. They feel broken inside. Something is missing. It's the trauma, it's the shame that needs to be addressed. And so when you hear the survivor's journey, it kind of makes sense to you. If you've been a survivor, or if you've worked with survivors, there are some things in it that ring true. And I'm going to tell you why. The first journey came to believe I'm not living a life of choice and freedom, but a life filled with traps and trappings, and that this can change. When we're talking again about choice and freedom, I'm not talking about literal chains and literal freedom, but we're talking about internal choice and internal freedom, feeling empowered and feeling free, gaining your voice and choice. And when we talk about traps and trappings, we're not talking about ropes that are holding you down. We're talking about the traps of society, the internal traps. We're talking about the trappings that are external to you, those types of things. The second journey made a decision to gain the support I need to reclaim my own power, choice, and voice. That has to do with gathering your bomb squad, gathering your trauma treatment therapist, your case manager, your AA or NA sponsor, whoever you want on your team to support you. So when you work with survivors, you understand that there are traps, that there are trappings that you are trying to address. And you understand that the path that you walk alongside survivors, the purpose is to help them regain their own power, choice, and voice. So that rings true to you. When we talk about the third journey, combats trauma and triggers, we know that their experience is all about trauma. They've been traumatized. The fourth journey, gain control of my inner voice, and it supports me. Gaining control of what I think and believe and feel about me in my core, my very core. After I've pretended, after I've shown a strong face, after I, walk tall, walk strong, talked a lot of shit, and act like I was the baddest person in the place. I'm talking about after everybody's gone, what I really feel about myself inside internally, getting that to be positive and getting that to be empowered. The fifth journey minimizes external threats to increase my safety. Now I'm looking around my environment. Who do I have in my environment? How can I increase my protective factors, decrease my risk factors? And then the sixth journey, open and honest self-examination. The seventh journey, building trust. The eighth journey, healthy and nurturing support systems. The ninth journey, spoken and unspoken commitments. I'm going to honor those that benefit me. The 10th journey, understands life is good, not perfect, and continually forgives self. The 11th journey, believes I'm more than a victim and a survivor and releases my burdens. And the 12th journey is I carry and passes on the new way of thinking, feeling, behaving throughout all my affairs. That rings true. It resonates with survivors. I've run it past survivors. It resonates with people who work with survivors. Why? Because we know that there is a lot of mistrust. And there should be, given what they've been through. We know that there's sometimes dysfunctional support systems around them. We know that sometimes there's dysfunctional relationships around them. We know that there are still continued threats, still high risk people, high risk situations around them. We know that there's something internal that we need to work on. We know that there's shame. And so these start to ring true because you've worked with people and you said, yeah, mistrust, relationships, support, informal supports, formal supports, all of those things, those are the barriers that continue to be in someone's life. But let me tell you what else. It's not just that, because many people have walked up to me and said, hey, this survivor's journey works for people who are trying to leave a gang situation, have been traumatized. It works for people that have experienced child abuse and they have trauma. It works for rape, incest survivors. It works for domestic violence survivors. And I've had some people say, it works for people with chronic illness, people that are facing a struggle, people that have experienced prolonged trauma, chronic trauma. And here's why it works. There's something called the hero's journey. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but the hero's journey was developed by a man named Joseph Campbell, and he collected the most cherished and prominent stories across cultures, across continents, and across time, across people's histories. And what he discovered is that these stories all follow the same or a similar process. And he called the process the hero's journey. So you are very, very familiar with the hero's journey because it's in many or most of the stories that you know and love. So the hero's journey begins with an individual living in the ordinary world. That's what he called it. And they are called to adventure. At first, the hero refuses the call because they're afraid or they have obligations that stops them from pursuing the journey. The hero then meets a guide. The guide provides them with the mentoring, knowledge, help, and self-confidence to take on the challenge. With the guide's mentorship, the hero crosses their first threshold. Now, this is probably making no sense to you, but stick with me because it's going to become very familiar to you. So once they first pass the first threshold, this is the moment when the real journey begins. So the hero faces a series of tests, meets allies, fights enemies. And at some point during the adventure, the hero approaches the innermost cave, or the most dangerous spot in the adventure. The hero then experiences what Joseph Campbell calls the ordeal, where he faces the biggest challenge yet. The hero wins and is rewarded, but the journey isn't quite over. So the next step is called the road back, where the hero tries to return to the ordinary world, but is unable because he's changed and there are new dangers on the way back. Next is the climax of the story. Everything the hero faced comes to a head. They're tested once more to make sure that they have learned the lessons that they've received throughout their journey. It's the final battle. Then the last journey is the return of the elixir. In the final scene, this is where the hero returns a different person because of the journey. And sometimes the hero shares the elixir or the process or the new understanding with someone else. Hey, I want to break into this episode for a moment. I want to remind you that survivors of sex trafficking experience trauma as a result. Trauma-informed care is something we learn so that we don't re-traumatize victims. However, trauma-informed care will not lower someone's trauma. We have survivors that need to heal inside. Most quality direct service workers connect survivors to needed services like healthcare, housing, legal services, and more. But these services, while necessary, won't address the internal trauma. Even when we connect them to trauma treatment counselors, they spend about an hour a week addressing traumas that have taken over their entire lives. They need so much more. Connecting someone to needed housing won't fix the brokenness inside. Arresting their trafficker allows them justice, but it won't heal the internal pain. Linking them to a lawyer won't take them to a place of reclaiming their freedom and experiencing genuine joy. Walking alongside survivors to provide support, nurturing, love, kindness, and to build relationship is critical. But they also need the tools to regain the power, choice, and voice internally. Healing the internal pain requires survivors to do the internal work. I've worked with and studied the issue for almost 30 years. I recently wrote a book outlining the 12 journeys that survivors need to go on to heal the trauma and to live the life they truly want to live. I'd love to train you to be a group facilitator leading survivors toward the internal healing they need. The training is the TNT Survivors Journey Group. Let me train you to facilitate these important groups and put survivors on their path to living the life they want and experience the freedom and joy they deserve. To learn more, go to my website, CeliaWilliamson.com, and watch the free webinar to learn more about the course. I look forward to training you and helping you help survivors to heal. And now, on with the podcast. The hero's journey is the ordinary world, there are 12 of them, the call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting the mentor, crossing the first threshold, tests, allies, enemies, approaches the innermost cave, has the ordeal, gets the reward, travels the road back, there's a resurrection of a new person, and the person returns with the elixir. So your most favorite television shows or movies follow the hero's journey. So some of the examples are Rocky, Star Wars, Wizard of Oz, E.T., Harry Potter, Lion King. All of those follow the hero's journey. So, for example, in the movie Rocky 1, not Rocky 25, but in Rocky 1, Rocky's ordinary world is that he's an unknown boxer, if you remember, that he's a loan collector who lives in the poor part of Philadelphia. Then Apollo Creed decides to give this some no-name boxer a shot at the title. The world champion title. So he calls Rocky because he just likes the name. Like he's looking at a bunch of names. Rocky's name's Italian Stallion. He likes it. So Rocky, however, knows that he's out of shape. So at first, Rocky refuses the call. So he's called to adventure. He refuses the call and he says, no, thanks. Then Rocky meets his mentor, which is the next stage. And that's the former boxer, Mighty Mick. Remember Mick? And he sees Rocky. He sees the potential in Rocky and he decides to be his trainer. So Rocky crosses the first threshold that changes his life, not when he's boxing, but when he meets his love interest, Adrian, and they go on a date. So Rocky's innermost cave is inside his mind when he doubts that he'll ever really amount to anything. Rocky's ordeal is pushing past his pain to train to be the best. He realizes that he might have what it takes as he runs up the museum steps, and he believes, he can win. His reward is the faith in himself and that he has what it takes, win or lose. The road back is when Rocky realizes during the fight that both he and Apollo Creed are equally matched. The resurrection of Rocky is when he's knocked down several times, but he keeps getting back up. Rocky doesn't even win the fight, but his elixir is that he wins his self-confidence, he beats his demons, and he hears from Adrian at the end that she loves him. Now, does it sound familiar? Okay, let me tell you another story. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The ordinary world, Harry Potter lives in a cupboard under the stairs. He receives a letter to attend Hogwarts. That's the call to adventure. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is living a normal life at home on his planet, ordinary world. R2-D2 gives Luke a message from Princess Leia asking Obi-Wan Kenobi to help her. I'm talking about the very first Star Wars. So, ordinary world, call to adventure. Let me tell you another one. The Lion King. Simba is heir to the throne in the Pride Lands, but he's living in the ordinary world. He's called to adventure when Scar kills Mufasa and tells Simba to leave. Let's take Spider-Man. Peter Parker is a nerdy student that's bullied by his classmates. That's his ordinary world. The call to adventure, he's genetically engineered, or a genetically engineered spider bites him and he wakes up with powers. So he's called to adventure. Let's see The Matrix. Thomas Anderson lives a double life as a Neo hacker. That's his ordinary world. He's called to adventure. The Neo receives cryptic messages referencing the Matrix. So is it starting to sound okay? So now, refusal of the call. After they're called to adventure, there's a refusal of the call. So in Harry Potter, he doesn't believe he's a wizard, so he refuses it. In Star Wars, Luke says no because he can't leave his aunt and uncle. In The Lion King, Simba, scared and alone, retreats to the desert. He doesn't go and take the throne. He retreats, so he refuses. Spider-Man, Peter uses his powers to win matches at an underground wrestling ring for cash. He refuses the grander call to be Spider-Man. In The Matrix, Neo talks to Trinity, but isn't sure if it's a dream. So he refuses the call. But then they each meet the mentor. In Harry Potter, Hagrid takes him to Diagon Alley. In Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi gives Luke his father's lightsaber and offers to train him to be a Jedi. In Lion King, Timon and Pumbaa introduce Simba to life in the jungle. That's his mentor. In Spider-Man, Uncle Ben reminds Peter that with power comes great responsibility. And in the Matrix, Morpheus tells Neo to take the red pill, which shows truth, or the blue pill, which returns him to the old life. So in each of these stories, they meet a mentor. Then they cross the first threshold. Harry Potter, the first threshold is he learns about his parents' death at the hands of Lord Voldemort. In Star Wars, Luke accompanies Obi-Wan and Alderaan to deliver the plans for the Death Star to Leia's father. See, they start to get into, they cross that threshold and now they're into it. In Lion King, Simba embraces the Hakuna Matata life. In Spider-Man, Peter stops Uncle Ben's killer and realizes he must use his power to stop crime and not be in these wrestling rings. In the Matrix, Neo chooses the red pill and wakes up from the Matrix. So interesting, huh? Okay. So the next stage is test allies and enemies. And I promise you, this is going to make sense with the survivor's journey once I tell you the hero's journey. So the next stage is the test allies and enemies that the hero has to go through. So in Harry Potter, he adjusts to life at Hogwarts. He goes through all the tests and all the things, but he adjusts to that life. In Star Wars, Han Solo and Chewbacca agree to take Luke and Obi-Wan to Alderaan, where he will face his tests, establish his allies. And then in The Lion King, Nala finds Simba and the two fall in love. So that becomes his ally. In Spider-Man, Peter becomes Spider-Man and takes photos for the Daily Bugle. And in The Matrix, Morpheus trains Neo to fulfill his role as the one that will free humanity. In each of these stories, they approach the innermost cave. And then they face the ordeal, the reward, the road back, the resurrection, and the return of the elixir. So let me just jump down to the return of the elixir, because in Harry Potter, Harry returns home for the summer, happy to belong to Hogwarts. In Star Wars, Luke wins a medal and takes his first step toward becoming a Jedi. In The Lion King, Simba ascends Pride Rock and reclaims the throne. In Spider-Man, Peter recalls Uncle Ben's words and embraces his role as Spider-Man. And in The Matrix, Neo makes a call in The Matrix telling the machines that he will free humanity. So this is a story, and I'm just telling you the popular culture kind of stories, but a lot of the loved stories that offer culturally, across cultures, across histories, offer people the path that they should take to achieve the things that they need to achieve. What comes from those stories are people's wisdom. And those stories follow, for the most part, the hero's journey. So much like the hero's journey, the survivor's journey is a path taken with the goal of recovery, and through recovery transforms lives. That's why it sounds so familiar to you, so perhaps even comfortable to you. So the journey of the survivor is one in which the person embodies the spirit of a victim reacting to life's circumstances and consequences. And they move to one of a survivor who eventually becomes a thriver to regain their own power, choice, and voice. Through the survivor's journey, members are delivered to a place where they are transformed emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and perhaps physically. The survivor's journey relies heavily on internal work that produces both positive internal and external results. So, much like the hero's journey, the survivor's journey is a path that's chosen by the path taker. The chosen one experiences trials and tribulations, engages in internal battles and external forces to deliver them to a place of transformation. Unlike the hero's journey, the survivor's journey is a process born from tragedy, not the ordinary world. And the path is one that leads to empowerment and freedom. The survivor's journey is a process developed from hundreds of in-depth interviews with survivors of trauma and from numerous studies and evaluations of programs that work or are working with survivors. The survivor's journey involves thousands of hours of process and analysis and understanding. So the survivor's journey also uses relevant theories and models and focuses on both trauma-informed care and trauma-focused care to lead survivors through the process of healing. So let me now compare for you the hero's journey and the survivor's journey. In the hero's journey, the hero lives in the ordinary world. In the survivor's journey, there's pain, misery, triggers, and re-traumatization. In the hero's journey, there's a call then to adventure. In the survivor's journey, an individual, an organization, or an agency reaches out to offer healing and life transformation. In the hero's journey, there's the refusal of the call. And in the survivor's journey, the victim also refuses the call. In the hero's journey, the hero meets the mentor. And this is where, in the survivor's journey, they begin the 12 journeys. Because the victim in the survivor's journey meets a mentor that shows them the path through the survivor's journey and becomes their guide. They complete the first and second journey, which is, came to believe I'm not living a life of choice and freedom, but a life filled with traps and trappings, and this can change. And the second journey made a decision to gain the support I need to reclaim my own power, choice, and voice. And I invite you to go back and listen to those episodes that go more in depth about the first and second journey. The next stage in the hero's journey is crossing the first threshold into the journey. In the survivor's journey, the survivor crosses the first threshold by directly addressing and working through their trauma and learning to combat their triggers. At this stage, they're taking the third journey, which is works through my trauma and consistently combats my triggers. The next stage in the hero's journey is tests allies and enemies. And in the survivor's journey, the survivor is also tested and learns first to battle and control their own internal voice. That's the fourth journey, gain control of my inner voice and it supports me. And dialogue and then remove enemies and establish allies. That's the fifth journey, minimizes external threats to increase my safety. In the hero's journey, the next stage is approaches the innermost cave. In the survivor's journey, the survivor enters the innermost cave to engage in an open and honest self-examination. Self-examination is the innermost cave. And that's the sixth journey, engaged in an open and honest self-examination. In the hero's journey, they now face the ordeal. In the survivor's journey, the most important pinnacle in the survivor's life is to learn to trust people who are trustworthy and to remove those that are toxic. That's the seventh journey. Builds trust with people who are nurturing and trustworthy and removes those that are toxic. The next stage in the hero's journey is the reward. After you've faced the ordeal, the reward. In the survivor's journey, the survivor builds healthy and nurturing support systems that reward their life. That's the eighth journey, builds healthy and nurturing support systems, and that's their reward. In the hero's journey, it's time for the road back. In the survivor's journey, the survivor learns to honor spoken and unspoken commitments that benefit themselves and bring them back to support themselves and their loved ones. And that's the ninth journey: honor spoken and unspoken commitments to self and others. In the hero's journey, there's the resurrection. This person is reborn to a new person. In the survivor's journey, this person is now a thriver, and the thriver is born and understands life is good, but not perfect, and continually forgives themselves. And that's the 10th journey: understands life is good, not perfect, and continually forgives self. And the 11th journey: believes I am more than a victim and a survivor and releases my burdens. And finally, in the hero's journey, it's the return of the elixir. And in the survivor's journey, the thriver brings this understanding back to share with others that need it. And that's the 12th journey: carries and passes on this new way of thinking, feeling, and behaving throughout all of my affairs. So while the hero's journey is often magical and mystical, sort of wrapped in stories of triumph, the survivor's journey is healing, born of pain, suffering, and despair. In taking the survivor's journey, the survivor is delivered to experience life free of the burdens of the emotional past. More importantly, journeys help members regain control of their life on their own terms. Once delivered, a thriver is able to choose joy and internal freedom. The survivor's journey is a process that, if followed, allows survivors the best chance at long-term recovery. Becoming the mentor that guides survivors through the 12 journeys is a way to allow survivors real internal healing. And so the survivor's journey, also called TNT Survivors Journey, we call what happens in the transformations as a chain reaction. So have you ever watched a fuse that's lit? They're sometimes called the chain reaction, where one process makes something else happen and so forth. One process makes another process ignite. The bomb that goes off affects everything around it. And sometimes we think of a bomb as breaking things apart and breaking things down, but some bombs are very productively used to break through. When we need to destroy walls and tear down old buildings, we use bombs. A life transformation is a breakthrough to another, more wonderful and more fulfilling life. One that before the survivor's journey, you could only dream of living. So if you carefully and specifically work the TNT journeys, you'll experience a life transformation in which there are 12 promises made. The first one is, we will use our truths and tools to guide our life transformation. Second, we will work from inside out and achieve the life we want to live. Third, we will have healthy boundaries to learn to trust ourselves and others, and will be trustworthy. Four, we will have the formal supports we need to create the informal supports we want. Fifth, we will handle difficult situations with grace because we are in control of our emotions. Six, we will no longer be internally vulnerable because we have internal healing. 7, we will escape from our traps and avoid life's tricks. 8, we will live a love-based life instead of a fear-based life. 9, we will lead a life of freedom powered by our will, our voice, and our choices. 10, we will no longer allow trauma and shame to control our lives. 11, we will fully love ourselves and have love-filled relationships with others. And 12, we will never again experience the control of a lover, a drug, a system, or an institution. It's a powerful group and it's a powerful process. I hope you'll consider becoming trained to be a survivor's journey facilitator. Until then, the fight continues.
If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.